day, morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you might be joining us from in the world today. My name's Meg Alexander. I am so excited to be hosting another amazing Power to Fly Chat and Learn event. But before we dive in, I just want to go over some quick housekeeping items, especially important if maybe you are new to the Power to Fly talent community. Maybe this is your first event, in which case, hi, welcome. We're so happy to meet you, and we're so glad you came today. Or if you are maybe one of our frequent flyers, but you haven't been with us for an event in a while, this will give you some ideas on how you can participate today. Now, if you'd like, you're welcome to turn your cameras on, share your smiling, maskless faces with us safely. But no worries and no pressure to be Instagram perfect, y'all. We truly do not care if you are in a three-piece suit or your bathrobe. We don't care if you are coming to us from your living room couch or a corner office. We want to be there to meet you where you are. There's no need to stand on ceremony here. Now, just as a quick heads up, as long as you don't come off mute today, you will not show up on the the live stream or the recording of today's event. So just as to kind of allay any concerns there might be there. Now, if you do still want to participate, but you don't want to turn your camera on, that is completely fine. You are always welcome to send in questions or comments into the group chat. And if you've got anything that you'd like to ask or say anonymously, no worries. You can just DM your question or comment to me. I'm happy to raise it and keep you anonymous. Now, like I said, today's session is being live streamed to our YouTube channel as well as our website. And we're also recording this, and the video will be posted on our YouTube channel within about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of the live stream, and to our website within about a day or two. So what that means for you all is, since this is being recorded, you don't have to take notes. You get to sit back, enjoy our conversations without having to worry if you missed a resource that someone mentioned, or didn't hear the last list item on something that we were talking about. So that's really nice. It also means that if our guest today says something like just totally mind-blowing and you cannot wait to share it with a friend or a coworker or a relative, you do not have to wait. So everybody that gets that registered for today's event is going to get an email from us in about 1 to 2 business days. So we'll probably get you like Monday next week with a link to where you can rewatch this on our website. So you're also always free to share those links, or you can always share the link from our YouTube channel. I'll share all of this stuff in the chat as we go, so y'all can check out some of the great things we're talking about. Last but not least, our goal is to get our resources, which are free, obviously, in the hands of as many people as possible. That is how we are going to achieve, pay equity in the workplace and gender parity, and making sure that our workplaces are truly representative of the world. Now, if you want to help us with that, we would love to, kind of let you in and help us grow our community. So if you'd like to, please feel free at any time, take photos or video, share out to your social network and let people know that you are growing with Power to Fly today. Y'all are taking an hour out of your day to spend with us, and you're doing something that's for you, something that's going to be beneficial to your career, to your life. And we want to make sure that not only are we encouraging this, right? Like, that's great. That is something awesome to do for each of you. You should be very proud of yourselves for taking this time and doing this for yourself. But we also want to make sure that, if at all possible, we are letting the world know that, like, hey, these are options, these are resources that we have. So please feel free. You can tag us. We are at Power to Fly on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And you're always welcome to tag us in. We would love to repost, retweet, reshare anything that you would like to put up there. Now, last but not least, before we dive into introductions, I do want to highlight that our guest here is here today on behalf of Logicworks. Now, I'm going to share their company page with y'all, the link for this in just a minute. It's going to look much like what you're seeing on your screen right now. And this is where you can go on Power to Fly and check out more information about Logicworks. You can get information on their what their benefits, what their company values are. You can take a look at events that they've partnered on with us, watch videos like tips on how to make a career move, as well as obviously checking out and searching their open roles. You can apply right from our website. We absolutely encourage you to go out and check this out. And I am going to be sharing that link for their page in the chat right now. So definitely take a look at that page. If you are interested in Logicworks, I'll talk a little bit more about the follow network later. But check out the page, see what interests you, see if this is maybe someplace that you could be at home. Now, I'm very excited to introduce you to today's speaker. We are joined by Zen Magnani. Now, Zen is an AWS cloud platform engineer with Logicworks, and she has given presentations at several tech conferences and really enjoys paying her successes forward. Now, Zen is a bold, straightforward, and brilliant thinker, as well as an innovator. She aspires to help other women achieve their goals in life as well as in STEM. Zen, welcome to the stage today. We are so happy to meet you and talk with you today. Is there anything else that you would like our audience to know about you before we dive into questions?
Yeah, I actually, I guess it could have been a question in and of itself, but I did want to give a little bit more background on me other than this. So a lot of people, when they write biographies or write resumes, it's all about the highs of their career, and that can sort of lead people to believe that, you know, the rise in your career is just sort of this linear path. I've done a bunch of different talks at various conferences, and I usually focus on the space of like software and ethics, software and philosophy, software and bias, and the reason I do that is because, it's very relatable to people when you can understand that it's not this, I don't know, like this linear rise. So like I had the benefit of getting a degree in computer science, but that was a tough time. I mean, there was times I wanted to quit. So I guess, yeah, I just want people to know that, like, don't feel like you have to, always be going up. Life's a journey.
Thank you for sharing that with us, because I think you're right. We're so conditioned that we kind of see the highlight reel of someone's life or their career, and nobody really thinks about kind of the ups and downs it took to get there. So I really appreciate you being transparent and sharing that with us, because I don't think you're alone in this. I think there are going to be a lot of people who have more of a like a chutes and ladders sort of journey as opposed to just a ladder. So I think that is absolutely wonderful, to a wonderful example to set for people, and to say like, hey, this is where I've gotten, but it was not all smooth sailing and a straight trajectory here.
Yeah, I remember a time in college where, like, and you can see where I'm at now in my career, but where all I thought that I had the potential to be was like a tech support person. And clearly, like, I've moved through the coding levels and all that in my years since college. But there was a time where all I thought I was going to be was like a tech support person in a small town. And it just shows you how, like, your dreams sort of expand if you let them,
Yes, of course. I think that is a wonderful thing to kind of preface this upcoming chat with. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a ton of questions that we were asked, so we're going to start going through those. But I just want to highlight and kind of remind y'all that you have the power to drive today's conversation. You took time out of your day to be here with us and spend time with Powerfly, and we appreciate that so much. So we want to make sure that you get rewarded for being here with us live. So if you have questions that you want to ask, please send them in. Send them into the group chat, DM me, whatever you'd like. If you asked a question at registration and you're not sure if we'll get to it, ask it again in the chat. If we go over one of your questions and you think that there's some more information or context that we should know, let us know in the chat. We really want to know. And even more than that, y'all, please feel free to throw in, how you feel about what we're talking about. Throw in comments. Maybe your lived experience has been different. We would love to hear from you. And then also, I usually call this out at the top of the calls, but I forgot this morning. I always like to see how far our global audience spreads. So please feel free, let us know in the chat where you're joining us from. Zen is actually in Columbus, Ohio. I am located in Toledo, Ohio. I'm not sure about Columbus, but my area is land that was indigenously occupied by Fox Nation, Kickapoo tribe, and something else. I want to say Iroquois is not it, but there were 3 there. So if y'all would like to share where you are joining us from, please feel free. Send it in the chat. I'm always really excited to see, kind of how far our audience spreads. All right, so our first question was asked a lot. And people wanted to know what challenges you've encountered while you navigate the cloud industry, obviously as a woman in a heavily male-dominated field. So walk us through this. What were some of the challenges that you came upon, in the journey that you took to get where you are now?
So I guess my intro is sort of a great segue into this. I'd say that the challenges that I encountered were sort of part of two or three different overarching things. They were like gaining respect was one, and imposter syndrome slash fear of failure would be another. I guess I could dive a little deeper into what each of those mean. So for the imposter syndrome and fear of failure, it's like honestly something that I still struggle with to this day. But the more you go through things and realize that you're capable of doing them, the more you start to be like able to not feel like you have imposter syndrome, because you're able to be like, oh well, last time, I did this just fine, and this time it'll be, better. And so I think there's that. What I meant by gaining respect is I found pretty quickly, when I went out into the field, that it is a male dominated field. And especially some of the old boys and old girls, type of club, it was really, and it was sort of subconscious, but I did notice it. But it was really a little bit harder to gain their respect being a young person, and especially a young woman. But I think that if you're willing to put the effort in, to just show your work and show it's good, that gets better with time. But those are the two big ones that I could think of. There's a bunch of like little stories I could share, like the one I did at the beginning about where I thought I'd end up, but those are the overarching like topics.
Awesome. Okay. So, all right, let's talk about the industry as a whole. Do you think that there is space for women in the cloud industry, or do you think that there is space there, or is it a situation where women are still fighting to create the space they need to be a part of the industry?
I think there's a little bit to both of those questions. So I definitely believe there's space. And the reason I say that is that my title is sort of under the umbrella of DevOps engineer. And I was reading, it's a fast growing, field. And I was reading something a while ago that I can't remember, but it's saying like only 2% or so of DevOps engineers are women. But I think that there's definitely space for women, because as companies are shifting more towards like having goals of inclusion and diversity, there's more demand for women and people of different ethnicities to join the tech workspace. Yeah, that's the initial thoughts on that.
Okay, no, I think that's important. All right, now this one obviously is going to be more of kind of an opinion. But for you, realistically speaking, do you think that the gender gap is going to be bridged anytime soon? I know there were studies done about like the pay gap between genders and how that, we're on track for that to be resolved in like 200 years or something. If it continues at the rate it is. So, but for you, like, do you think that the gap between even representation is likely to even out anytime soon, or do you really not see that happening based on what you've seen?
Couple things. So I think the gap starts like much earlier than like looking for a job. Like, we even subconsciously just don't treat our young girls as the same way as we treat young boys. And at some point they get turned off of like math and science. And so I think that there is definitely like a gender and pay gap, but the more over time, the more young women we can bring up to believe in their ability to be in that field, the better it'll get. I also think that there's always room for skilled workers. So like I think part of the problem is honestly like just there's not enough women yet learning these skills. It's not like they don't want to pay well. The companies don't want to pay well for the positions is, I think, sometimes just a lack of people like qualified to do them.
No, I think that's a really interesting take on it, because you're right. You can't, it's sort of like the top of funnel thing, right? Like you can't ensure that this gap is going to keep, evening itself out unless you are sure that there are more women entering the tech field, or, people that don't identify as men. And so it is really, interesting to see what that looks like from the inside, because we get these reports, people publish stuff and you hear that there's like, statistics on it, but thank you for sharing what your experience has been. I think that's very, very helpful.
I think we'll probably touch on this later in the course too, or I also think it was in my bio, but I was raised by a female engineer. My mom was female engineer and my dad was just an engineer too. So like sort of from this really young age, I had this advantage that I didn't ever think I couldn't enter the STEM field. Like I was very good at math, and that was encouraged. So it's like, I think talks like these and just like the resources we can give women to support them having that worldview is really important.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let's talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. This has been a buzzword that's been, super popular, especially in the last several years. And it is something that I feel like we're talking about more often than we ever have before. Is this something that you've had to deal with in your career?
Yeah, I think I already said it, but definitely yes. And I think that, in all truthfulness, I still get it sometimes, but I think there's a few different reasons it happens. One of the ones that I've read some research on is like people just get imposter syndrome because they feel like they can't do it. So like they're essentially lacking a skill, whatever it is. And so some study and self-practice or knowledge gaining would help that. But there's the other deeper reason for imposter syndrome, which is that people feel like they're not enough. And I think everybody struggles with this to some extent. And that's like one thing where it's like no matter what, how many people tell you that you're great, it's not going to change the imposter syndrome unless you do the inner work to understand why you don't feel like enough.
Yeah, I think that's really, I'm loving the fact that our discussions on imposter syndrome are happening at the same time that mental health and anxiety and depression, like these kinds of common, these kinds of conditions are much more widespread than I think any of us really realize.
I think,
and so,
yeah.
It's interesting that this is the conversation we're having, right? Because it does require, if you're going to talk about imposter syndrome, it does kind of require a fairly high level of emotional intelligence,
Yeah, it's like and I've been lucky to like, have great mentors and like a good therapist and like
right? Yes.
I think that therapy is so good because and it's more talked about now, but it's so good because if you go regularly and work through like, what you've been up to in your life, you sort of avoid having to use it like an emergency, like when your life's breaking down. Yeah. So I sort of think of therapy like brushing your teeth. If you do it regularly, you end up being all the better for it.
110%. As someone who started therapy in 2020, and I know I am not the only one that did, I can absolutely confirm, like this is something I wish I had done years and years and years earlier, because it's making so much of my life a lot easier, or at least more understandable,
Yeah, and there's still stigma around it, but like,
oh yeah,
it's much better than it used to be. And yeah, I just hope people can continue to realize how their like thought processes and different things are really contributing to how they feel. I think a lot of people go through life and just assume they have no power over what they feel and what they think, but in reality, you do.
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, that's one of the things that like, so I have bipolar disorder. So intrusive thoughts are something that I struggle with. And it's one of those things that I've had kind of get used to and remind myself that, just because my brain thinks it doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's
Yeah,
true at all. So
for
I think
sure.
you're right. I mean, it is very important to remember that, just because you feel like you're not enough does not mean you are. Does not mean that at
Yeah,
all.
there was a really interesting analogy that I heard where it's like somebody held up a dollar bill and they're like, "What is this worth?" Well, a dollar. They like crumpled it up and then opened it again and they're like, "What is this worth?" Well, it's still worth a dollar. They like put it on the ground and stamped on it and they're like, "Well, it's still worth a dollar." And it was this amazing like analogy for like no matter how you feel, because emotions are fleeting, they eventually pass. Your worth does not change.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I think that's a wonderful thing to remember. And if y'all have struggled with imposter syndrome, give us a +1 in the chat. What's something that worked for you? For me, like it was just remembering your brain lies to you. And if I'm thinking that something's wrong or that I'm not doing well in some area, who told me that? Did I hear it from a boss, or am I like inferring this on my own? Am I assuming that I'm not enough as opposed to just realizing like I'm in the job I'm in because I do a good job? All right.
Yeah.
So what we've touched on this briefly, but are there any things that you have done, like tips or tricks for like kind of building up your confidence outside of therapy? Are there like things that you do
Um,
before a big meeting or anything like that?
well, so before can, can you ask question one more time? Because I just had a
Yeah,
brain
of
fog.
course. So if you are sitting in a place of feeling like you're not enough and you need to kind of build up your confidence, what are some ways that you've
Right.
done that outside of therapy?
Okay, so there's some good books. I really like to read. So I read a lot of stuff, usually from the personal development section, but there's one that I really liked on self-confidence, and it's called Unstoppable Self-Confidence, and it's by a man named Andrew Leadham. And I find it's an easy read, but he like sort of breaks down a bunch of these myths that people have about themselves and about the world. And I don't think I've finished it yet, but it's a really good book. So there's that. And I just definitely think that, to build up confidence, you have to be okay with where you're starting. Like you have to be okay, like, okay, I don't have this. And then like when you understand that it's something you want to have, you can go to the next step, which is like trying to figure out, well, why don't I have confidence? And I'm not in the position to be like, oh, well, everybody doesn't have confidence for the same reason. I mean, it's like changes person to person, but I just really think doing those deep dives into like, how you're thinking is very important. I'm a big proponent of like what you think determines your results.
Yeah, I know. I think that's absolutely, that's something I also subscribe to. This idea that, your brain is incredibly powerful and you can convince yourself of things that are true just as easily as you can convince yourself of things that are not true. So trying to make sure and verify like, what's going on with you, like outside stimuli or outside data is what works for me, because I know that my brain will lie to me and play tricks on me and stuff. So I love that idea of kind of continuously grounding yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Let's see here. All right. A lot of people are thinking about transitioning into tech right now.
Mm.
It's very
The field's
reminiscent
just
of
booming.
well, yeah, and like I'm sure probably nobody's old enough to remember the reference, but like in The Graduate, when they're talking about like plastics, you got to be in plastics. Plastics is the future, but nobody ever says anything about it. And so like tech kind of gets, or at least in the last couple of years, has kind of got that same brain association for me, where like it seems like everybody wants to get into the field. If people are looking to move into tech, what are some entry level positions within the tech industry that are good for people to kind of keep on their radar or check out?
Yeah, so there's different ways you can start out in tech, and there's like three I'd like to outline that are probably pretty popular. So the first is, and this is actually how I got started. I worked in like IT support for that was my part-time job all through college, and so from there, like you get to fix computers, you get to talk on the phone and with people in person, just troubleshoot whatever's going on with their computers. And that like can be an easy step to like, advancing on and up the ladder. Um, there's also the people who like will go on an internship or an apprenticeship, and I find usually those are paid, so it's a pretty nice way to get started, and gain like knowledge and information from people that have been around and been doing things in the field longer. And the third way, oh, what was it? I'm blanking on what the third way was, but if I remember it, I'll come back to it.
No worries. If you remember it later, you can always share it again with us. All right.
Sure.
So let's kind of dive in a little bit more. Nicole was sharing in the chat that it's all cloud now. You have to be in the cloud. So let's talk about some of the key soft skills for thriving in the cloud. Do you think there are any that are really top of mind, like top 5, top 3?
I would say the sole soft skill that has made me able to like advance my career and such is just communication, like having good communication, because there's so many places in the workplace where that can just break down, and it affects the culture. So like if your boss is or several levels up from you is so far removed from the day-to-day happenings of the rest of the employees, there can be like a communication gap. If information is siloed in like one department, there's a communication gap, and sometimes people just don't ask enough or the right questions. So I really think like just being able to communicate openly and understand where people are coming from, and listening is a big one too, like not just listening to people talk, but like listening and observing how people are using the tech. I think you pick up a lot that way too.
I like that. I think that's a good breakdown there. Let's see. Are there any soft skills that you've seen that people think are transferable but might not be quite as useful? Because communication is one that we hear a lot. I'm thinking things like multitasking used to be a very big, a very big thing that like everybody wanted to show off that they could multitask, right?
Yeah, I'm not a huge believer in tasking. I find I really can't do it anymore. I used to be able to, but it's just my work gets done so much better when I can just work on one thing and then switch to the next. I'm trying to think of other soft skills I'd recommend.
I love the communication like call out, because you're right, like it affects so many different areas of our lives. And you're also very right to highlight that like communication isn't just being able to express yourself well, it's also being able to listen so that you can comprehend what the other person is telling you, so that you can have all of the information at your fingertips.
Yeah, and that can turn into a job in and of itself. Like there's the people who are architects, for example, and they like their job is to like meet with stakeholders, understand what they understand in their depth of knowledge, and then transfer it to software engineers by writing up a plan, who like these two groups have like entirely different sets of knowledge. So like if you are good at communication, there's like whole jobs where like that's just like a great place to be in tech.
Okay. All right, let's talk about mentorship. A lot of people have questions around mentorship. One of the biggest things that we get asked is like, how does it help you? Like, does it actually benefit your career movement, your mobility, your professional development? Let's talk about your experience. Have you seen, like, do you have a mentor? Is this something that's been a factor at all in your career so far?
So I am a huge proponent of mentors. I think they are probably one of the most helpful things you can, or like relationships you can cultivate. And I think people oftentimes might have a sort of tunnel vision view on what a mentor is. So like there's a lot of people and life coaches and business coaches that you can pay to like mentor you. But for me, I found that like that's a little too narrow of a definition, right? Like, because your supervisor could honestly be a mentor if you have a good one, and there would be a great person to learn from. Somebody who's a little like a friend or a family member with a little more life experience could mentor you on some soft skills. I mean, I think that mentorship is awesome, and we need to sort of seek that variety of it. Like, if you just have a business mentor, but you don't have the soft skills, like it's up in the air if that's going to be much help, you know?
No, I like that idea. We've heard people come talk to us and talk about it in terms of like a personal board of directors. So like maybe not everybody that is on your directors is mentoring you or is helping you along the way, in the same fields, right? So like, for me, like my husband is on my board of directors. This is one of my closest friends, and I trust his judgment. My mom, obviously, but like not everybody would include those people on their board of directors. So I love that
Yeah.
idea that, you can learn soft skills from them as well as tech stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That brings to mind to me another analogy, sort of the same kind, but like I think it was Brene Brown that said this one, but like she has the idea of make a like a 1 inch by 1 inch piece of paper and write down like 4 or 5 people who like whose opinions you value and who would, same as like you said, be on the board of directors. And then like when you get input that's maybe not wanted from other people outside that square, be like, nope, like they can have their opinion, but I don't need to like internalize it.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot. Um, is there anything that you found that works best when trying to connect with mentors? Especially like people ask us this a lot when there maybe isn't a formal process in place, or there's not like a program they're going through or something like that. What are some of the ways that you've like approached people that you wanted to have mentor you?
Um, I wouldn't say I've like honestly, I haven't approached anyone and been like the intent of like mentoring. Like a lot of my mentors are people that are also my friends. They might be older than me, but they're still people I consider friends. So I don't think I ever went about it with quite the intentionality of like this person's going to be a mentor. I just like would go out and meet people and be like friends with people and be like, hey, this person actually really knows a lot about whatever such and such, and it just sort of evolves naturally. I don't know. I'm less like knowledgeable on like actually like reaching out to somebody and like wanting to pay them, for example, to mentor you.
Okay. I think that definitely helps because I feel like there's a lot of people that feel like it has to be a formal process, but like, does it really? Like you can keep it more in terms of learning from someone as opposed to like taking something from them, I guess. Like we're like asking something of them, I should say.
Yeah, I like that definition.
Okay. All right. So let's talk, one of the things that you were talking about with mentorship and the benefits of it is to find ways that you can kind of grow your career or even find people that you think you might want to model your journey off of. But as you're thinking in terms of this career growth, how are some of the ways that you foster it, that you create space for and give yourself opportunities for your career to grow?
Okay. Yeah, so for my career to grow, I guess I usually like to have somewhat of a plan, but not too much of a plan. And like, let me explain what I mean by that. So there's like, obviously people who have like can help you make a 10-year, career advancement plan. And like have, that in much detail. And I think that that's generally like I wouldn't do that because I believe that there's multiple ways to get where you want to go, wherever that is, like in tech and life. And I think that by like making a plan so far out or with so much detail that you honestly might end up closing yourself off from other experiences that would pop up in the meantime, but you'd be like, no, that's not part of my plan, and just sort of, push it to the side. What I am a proponent of is like having a general idea of where you want to go, and then like for example, for me, I'm a cloud platform engineer, but I love people and I also love tech. So like that position I was teaching or not teaching, talking about earlier with the sort of process skills and communication and between different groups. That's something that I say that because I would like that to be something I do down the road. But at the same time, I'm like happy where I am. And I think one of the best things you can do that probably won't cost money hiring a coach again. One of the best things you can do is just reach out to your supervisor and be like, hey, like this is where I would love to go ideally. Can you help me come up with a couple objectives to do that? And I think like people like underestimate what they can do in 3 years, and they overestimate what they can do in 1 year. So like just I guess having the right timeline and like having those goals for yourself out there so that other people know about them so that they can help, you get there.
Loving that answer. Thank you. Okay, we do have a couple questions in the chat. So just real briefly, we had a lot of people wondering about cloud computing and kind of examples. If somebody knows literally nothing about tech but wants to know like what's cloud computing, is there a quick breakdown that you could give us for it?
The first
like
thing that comes
one of
to
the
mind
biggest ones is like, why do they call it the cloud? And the only thing I'm finding in my research is because it doesn't exist in one physical location. So
that's funny because it technically does. Like
yeah,
Amazon's cloud is like literally like server rooms, right? So it's somebody's computer, and thinking of it as cloud, I think is what made it so abstract to people. But I guess the difference between cloud and what was done before is that because you don't have to buy servers, like you're running a company, you don't have to buy servers and maintain them. And, maybe you have bought too much of the servers, and then you have extra that really, costs you a lot of money. What the cloud does is it's scalable. So like you can just pay for the resources you need. And so it saves money. And I don't know. I still don't agree with it's out there in the ether. I mean, it is computers at its core. It's just a large number of them.
I think it's one of those things that's always very interesting to me because at the end of the day, it's literally all zeros and ones. Like that's what everything is based on. And so the idea that like, oh, it's suddenly not tied to a physical location. Okay, no, that's not actually true. Like it's not like the information is somehow floating around. Like it still has to be housed somewhere. So I think it's helpful for us all to kind of understand that like cloud isn't software, it's a method of storing all of this extra stuff that used to be tasked out to each individual group. And now you have places like Amazon or Microsoft that host these clouds. So you can use their resources.
Their services, resources is a good word for it. Basically, a cloud allows you to borrow other people's resources and in computing for like, just as much as you need to.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So to keep moving along with our questions, because we have about a little under 20 minutes left. So if you got questions, please feel free to get them in. All right. So in the same vein as, the career growth we were talking about, I want to know if you find career plans useful. I've had bosses and mentors over the years who have suggested doing career plans. Sometimes they're 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, stuff like that. Have you done career mapping, career planning before? And if so, is this something that you think works?
I think I sort of already answered that one on the last question, but like I'm a proponent of having a plan, like I said, to an extent. And I think when people do career plans, it's maybe a little more on the side of like, this is a lot of detail and doesn't allow me much wiggle room. So
okay.
yeah, I think I sort of already answered that one.
Okay. No, I think you're right. I was thinking back to another question. I was like, I don't think we did that, but you're right. We absolutely covered this. Um, and then what about career coaching? I've used it before. I didn't find it super helpful, but I also I didn't know what on earth I was doing. So because there was like no direction, I didn't find it super useful. Have you availed yourself of career coaching, life coaching, that kind of thing?
So there's a few things there with life coaching or career coaching. There's no like board or like governing entity that like puts um, like restrictions on it for the help of the people like learning from the life coaches and mentors. So like there's a lot of life coaches and mentors that just like I don't know might not teach you much or like sort of I've heard of people like sort of feeling shorted, so one thing I would say is if you're going to do that, definitely like make sure you do an intro session or like do research on like their past reviews or whatever. I think having a life coach, it's sort of I sort of consider like mentoring, life coaching, and like therapy are all like parts of a whole. And I don't know. I think yeah. I'm not a huge proponent of like paying people to do those things. Like just maybe it's just because I can like find ways to, have friends who know these things, but like yeah, I'm not so sure.
No, I mean, and so this is why I like to ask these questions, right? Because not all of us have experienced these things. And it obviously each person's experience is their own, but I think it is also very, very important to hear, like, why, if you have used something or what, or if not, why. And I also agree with you. And like, let us know in the chat, y'all. Do you agree? Like, do you think that things like therapy, life coaches, career coaching, that kind of thing, like, do you see it as all parts of a whole? I absolutely do. Like, I see these as things that absolutely are beneficial. And I love this idea of, utilizing these options, but like kind of leaving yourself wiggle room, right? Like not landing on one option and saying like, okay, now that I have a plan, this is it. And I'm never reevaluating, and this is what I can stick to for the rest of my life. So I think that that's a very good call out, to leave a little room.
Something I have done is like if I see a life coach or somebody similar that I like their what they're having to say. Usually it's like I'll read a book and I'll be like, wonder what else, like personal development book, and I'll be like, wonder what else resources they have. So usually a lot of them will have like courses you can buy on their website, and usually it's not as much money as like paying them to have a one-to-one with you. So like if there's somebody I really think has great thoughts on something, I'll go look at their like course and start doing it in my own time. That's something I would suggest.
Okay. Now, right along those same lines, a lot of people had questions about certifications or, educational options, places that they should go to make themselves able to enter the cloud industry. Are there any certifications, boot camps, classes, like anything that you recommend or that you have used?
So yeah, I have a couple certifications. Definitely, you could do either Microsoft Azure Cloud or Amazon's AWS Cloud, and they both have like fundamentals level certification that you could take. And I think that that's a good place to start. But it's sort of gonna depend on where other people are at in their technology journey, because like if you have no knowledge of code, I'm gonna advise you to do something different than do this cert, right? Because and I think it also depends on like where in the cloud sector do you want to end up. Like it's so there's so many different jobs that relate to the cloud. Like you might want one certification for doing DevOps, like I do, or you might want another one if you want to do like security. So like I think it's a very broad question that probably needs to be like explored on the individual level. But I do definitely think there's the certifications can be very helpful.
Okay. Now, when we're talking about, we talk about these certifications and things, and sometimes they are like a set of classes to kind of get you up to speed. But that also doesn't necessarily gain you the experience that most employers want to see or ask for in the interview process. So if people are unsure how to first gain cloud related experience, what do you recommend? Like how did you first have experience with the cloud industry?
I think it sort of goes back to what I said before about like how I started out in IT and sort of just worked my way up from there. Honestly, I like if you asked me 2 or 3 years ago, like if I, wanted to work in cloud, I would have been like, sure, but like not really have any path forward. I actually sort of accidentally ended up as a DevOps person. So I
like you tripped and like just landed in the office chair.
Well, let me explain. So when I was first out of college, I worked for a big consulting, like software consulting company. And so they'll put you on a bunch of different projects. And the last one I was on for that company was for Accenture. And they're building, well, initially they just wanted me to do DevOps. And the guy was interviewing me and he's like, I know you don't have any experience in DevOps and it's all in software up until this, like software engineering up until this point, but we're willing to bring on someone who can learn. And would you be okay with that? And I was like, sure, I'd love to learn, right? And I didn't know what it was at that point. And then so I sort of get there and I'm doing, things for my role, but there was this piece of software that they had that it had been sitting on a shelf and like it was sort of a demo that I saw a lot of potential in. And it was like a how do I describe it? Like a platform to manage multiple different clouds on. So it's a huge thing, but I like undertook like sort of getting it to the point where they had a proof of concept. And so like from there I was like, hey, I'm actually pretty good at DevOps. And like so that was what I looked for in my next role, since it had been my previous role. So I sort of accidentally ended up like I had the certifications for the cloud, but like I hadn't actually like worked in it until I was working DevOps.
All right, love that. Okay, we also had a lot of messages from people who were looking, like we talked about earlier, to pivot into tech. This one person wrote in and said that they're in their 50s and planning a pivot into tech. Do you think there are any key skills that would help me break into the tech field? So let's talk about, if you are coming from a certain perspective, right? So ageism is a huge, a huge concern within the workforce, especially as you get into tech. What would you recommend as somebody who it might be an older applicant? Are there key skills that would be specific to somebody with that background?
So I think again, it's a little bit of a broad question because like tech is ginormous, but assuming they wanted to pivot into cloud, those fundamental certifications I think would be a great place to start. I also really want to like push like having a great resume is really important too. And I don't just mean like formatting. I mean like if you're 50, you've obviously worked in many different careers or like have a lot more experience. So like find a way to word what's on your resume from past jobs so that it's a skill or a takeaway that is applicable to tech. And I think that'll have an easier time for people. Trying to think if there's anything else like I would recommend as sort of soft or hard skills for this. I think those are good places to start. Sort of my answers to a lot of these questions have been sort of like, well, it depends on what the prior experience is and where they.
Well, you're not the only one telling us this. There's a lot of questions that always have that it depends answer. And coming from a legal background, I'm very used to that. It depends. Yeah. Like you might as well just rubber stamp it on my forehead because that will be the thing that I say the next, for every question you ask.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, no, we really appreciate you kind of diving in because sometimes the answers are a little bit different. And sometimes, that there's going to be something that's slightly different there, but you might not know what it is. Not all of us, like I'm not in my 50s, so I can't speak from that perspective.
Right. And back to the resume thing for a little bit. One thing I did when I was first crafting my resume for things was I went up and looked, like Google example, software engineering resumes. And there was like a site I found, assuming you could still do this. The site I found, it's like, resumes that got people the jobs, right? Like the jobs that they wanted. And they have examples. And so I like crafted the way, at least the way my resume looks, was crafted based on something that was already known to work. So like that's a small thing you could do like today if you wanted.
All right, I like that. Okay, let's talk about what it means to network. A lot of people were talking about this in the chat thread early on in today's event. And a lot of the questions that we got came from people who are newer in their careers, right? So like people that are entry level or junior professionals. And a lot of people find it hard to try and figure out what they're going to bring to the relationship, right? Because it feels like if I'm going to ask somebody for, if I'm going to try and network and ask somebody for help, then what am I bringing to the table? How do you think of these relationships in those terms? And what was it like when you were fresh? Like how did you think about networking when you were first starting out?
So when I was very first starting out, I was in college and they would have the career fair and I'd go to that. So something that's not applicable to everyone, but it gives you a good idea, walking around talking to all the different people from the different companies, sort of how to do an elevator pitch. So that was good. I think when you're just starting out, you definitely need to know like what your elevator pitch is in like 30 seconds. What is it that's great about you or your experience or whatever? But I also know I got involved in like conferences really early on. I throughout college did some video game design. And so like I eventually started going to a video game conference that's in Columbus called GDEX. And I actually ended up speaking there. I've spoken there 5 years now. But just like going to different conferences, I think is a great way to get experience with like you can talk to people, you can network, and some of them are young and some of them are already established. And I think a lot of conferences also moved online. So like it's even easier for people to go and oftentimes cheaper. So like definitely that's like the big thing I could think of. Because I mean that's what got me my start into doing talks and presentations like this. So yeah.
I like that. And just, to remind y'all and kind of underscore, like, if you think if you think of networking and mentoring and all these kinds of things as building a relationship, it quickly becomes a lot less scary. It's a lot less transactional because you're thinking
Mhm.
not in terms of like what can I bring to the table for this one segment. Like you think of it in long-term perspective. So that you might not think that you're bringing anything to the table right now, but that may not be true in the slightest. And the connections that you're making, they might not just benefit you. You might end up as the person who somebody asks you a question, you can't answer it, but somebody that you could connect them with that might actually be really great at this. So, even if you are not the primary beneficiary of these connections, they're still really important to make. These are people that you can kind of relate to as you go through your career journey. And you might be the person that they ask for help. You don't know. So I love that.
Yeah, I
Um,
think
oh, go
it's
ahead,
one.
please.
No, sorry. I think it's one aspect of like even if you can't like you don't feel like you can contribute now, like sort of what I said in my intro, like I just enjoy paying it forward because I was once somebody who was, just starting out. But
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely agree with what you said. Like it makes it a lot less transactional when you think of it as like building a friend or building a relationship or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, even if it's just somebody you can talk to when you go to conferences, like some industries are very small and you will see the same people. So,
Mhm.
making it less of a scary place, never a bad idea.
Yeah.
All right, we have we have about 5 minutes left. So I do want to hold space here. If y'all have questions, send them in. I've been trying to make sure we got to as many as possible today. The one question I want to ask before we go into our last slide here. what is your number one piece of advice for professionals who are looking to pivot into the cloud industry? If they leave here remembering nothing else, what should they remember?
If they remember nothing else, mindset. Have a good mindset. I firmly believe that if you do that, you just like things will just come to you. Like if you are in alignment between what you want and what your mind's thinking. I know it's like not the traditional response, like, but I definitely think mindset and just everything that goes with it is what I would counsel anybody looking to switch fields. Like think you can do it, and I believe you will.
I love that. Absolutely love that. All right, so I'm gonna go in here and share my screen with y'all, and this will, so what you're seeing on your screen, this is a couple set of questions that we had asked of Zen prior to today's session. So we didn't get a chance to talk much about Logicworks, but I want to talk about the company culture. You described it as welcoming. Could you tell us what you mean by that, or give us an example?
I just think it's like new people find it to be a very good culture. Like anytime a new person joins, whoever they're reporting to sends out an email with like, hey, here's a little bit about this person. And there's always people who reply and are like, welcome to the team, and we're so glad to have you. So, and then they really mean it. So that's what I meant by that.
All right. Now the people your favorite part about working at Logicworks, you talked about how everyone's encouraged to be innovative and ask questions. What's been an innovation or a question that you were really glad that you were able to ask because of the, the culture at Logicworks?
Innovation question. Well, when I was first starting out, like there was just a lot of stuff I had to learn that was like proprietary software. So I think just feeling like I was able to ask questions to my boss or to the team was like the biggest thing in helping me learn and get on board quickly. I think in addition to what I wrote here, that it's very people are encouraged to ask questions, but like it's also okay if you're like wrong, in your thinking, or there was a better way to do it, or like failure is sort of encouraged in a way.
Well, it makes sense. We hear that a lot from tech companies, like the culture will tell you fail big and fail fast, right? Because you want to keep trying things and you want to learn. But it's, some places are very, very high paced or fast paced. So yeah, I think that's a really good call out that, if you're going to encourage innovation, you also need to provide a safe space for it. People need to know that it's okay to throw ideas on the pile, because even if theirs doesn't work out, you're not going to get shamed for the fact it didn't work out, because at least you're learning something from it.
Yeah, it's in the culture and the mindset again.
Excellent. All right, so your last thing here is your top tips for someone who's interviewing. Are these Logicworks specific, or are these tips that you think are applicable across the board?
These are tips applicable anywhere. I think a lot of people misjudge what employers are looking for, and also they don't like interview the employer back. So like your job should be somewhere that like you feel like you can show up for the day and you're going to have good people to talk to, or you're encouraged to be your authentic self there. So like I think the more you interview, the easier that gets. But yeah.
All right, I love that. Okay, we are at the end of our time today, but I just want to take a couple of seconds here quickly to say thank you, Zen. It has been wonderful to spend the last hour with you, learning more about cloud computing than I ever knew before. So thank you for that. But you came more than prepared for today's session, and we are just so happy that you spent time with us today. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. I also want to extend a huge thank you to our audience. Y'all have been crazy active in the chat. I was loving all of the collaboration, the links sharing, all kinds of stuff. It was honestly great. I love to see this. So thank you to everyone who was participating in the chat, and thank you for all the amazing questions y'all sent in. Truly, these were, you had us, really loving these questions. I was reading them and could not wait to ask them today. So thank you all for that. That's going to bring us to the end of time today, but I just want to remind y'all, if this has been your first event with Power to Fly, I hope you enjoyed it. We are so happy to meet you, and we cannot wait to see you again. Hopefully you'll join us for another event sooner rather than later. If you are one of our frequent flyers, welcome back. I'm so happy that we got to see you again. I love always seeing friendly faces and display names and avatars in the chat here. So thank you all for that. I hope that you have a safe, happy, healthy rest of your Thursday. If we don't see you, before the holidays, have a great Halloween if you're US based. And we can't wait to see you back on another event. That's going to be it for today. Bye, y'all.